Hi guys, it's a pleasure being here. So let's be true to ourselves for a second. We keep being influenced by outer sources. And while we do that, while we are being influenced, we tend to forget or to ignore the very pillars that made us start our game or our business, whatever that is. And my talk today is about whether or not ignoring those pillars is beneficial in any way. And it is about how we at Gameloft, from a marketing perspective, address this issue. As I was introduced, my name is Stefan. I'm a former copywriter, art director, entrepreneur, and now product manager at Gameloft Romania. This means that I am in charge of almost all marketing aspects of certain Gameloft games. In truth be told, I am the guy that has to bring new users to our games. And as you might be aware of not, Gameloft is developing in Romania quite a few successful titles, like Sniper Fury, Asphalt Street Storm, and my favorite, and the one that I'm assigned to, Modern Combat 5. These games are developed in Romania from scratch, from zero. They are developed from concept to market evolution to end of game evolution. So the entire cycle is done here in Bucharest, at least for those 3 games. And for me, that proved to be a blast working here. Not only that, but I am a kind of a hardcore gamer myself. I've been playing games since as long as I can remember. I started playing on an HC85, on an Atari, on almost every console or PC that ever appeared. I don't think I missed any major titles. And the peak of my career was back in 2002 when me and my team, we've won the first ever national championship of Counter-Strike in Romania. So I could say, thank you, I could say about myself that I'm a decent player. I could say that I'm even a better first-person shooter gamer. So when I first got into Gameloft, like 18 months ago, they said the first project that you'll have to take is Modern Combat 5, and that's the equivalent of Counter-Strike for mobile phones. Just imagine my enthusiasm. I was really thrilled. You know, I'm playing Counter-Strike on mobiles and I'm doing all the marketing for it. And I downloaded the game, I installed it, and it was really amazing because I could look at the skies and the floors for a long time because it was near impossible for me, at least, to move, shoot, and aim at the same time. And I thought to myself, well, if I consider myself a good first-person shooter, why is it so hard for me to do this, to play this game? And more importantly, how must that feel for a new user, for someone that doesn't have my experience or my knowledge or my ambition to learn this game? So I started looking for answers, you know, because I had to bring players, new players into the game. And as always, when you look for solutions, you start looking in beer, right? Because it helps clear the mind, because it brings out our most creative parts, right? But truth be told, I knew that a large brand of beer had a similar issue with ours. And when it comes to the beer industry, they have the biggest budgets and the most creative ideas out there. And so I said, I have something to learn from them. So beer. Beer is top of mind when you think about hanging out with friends or families. Whatever you think about hanging out, beer comes first in mind. So you could almost argue that beer sells itself, right? So as a marketer in beer industry, all you have to do is differentiate your brand from others. But in this almost perfect environment, one big brand of beer had a problem. They wanted to offer the best possible taste. And in order to do that, you would have to wait for, they say, 119.5 seconds in order to get the perfect draft of beer. That's 2 minutes. But I love that technicality. Does any one of you know which brand of beer I'm talking about? Please raise your hands. Good. So you might actually learn something useful today. Okay, so when you say 2 minutes, it's not that long, right? You're in a bar, you're hanging out, you're feeling good. It's just 2 minutes. But imagine this scenario. The bar is really crowded. You're with someone or conversation partner, and you waited already in line to get to the bartender, right? You come to him and you say, I want this particular brand of beer. And he says, well, you have to wait at least 2 minutes. There's a big line of people behind you, right? They're also wanting to order. What do? Do you wait those 2 minutes, or do you simply just grab any kind of beer and move on, right? I bet that this company had major issues figuring this out. You know, they had a flaw, they had a problem in front of their competition. It was not a problem with the product itself, but with the way that people perceived their product. And they had to decide whether they change the brewing formula or whatever technical thing they could do so they could pour it faster, or they could stick by their pillar and acknowledge it as one of their flaws and turn it into one of their strengths. And once I'll reveal which brand I'm talking about, you'll understand exactly what they did. I'm talking about Guinness. In order to get the perfect pint of Guinness, you have to wait 2 minutes. And what they did from a marketing perspective is they changed nothing at the product. They loved their product. But they changed their slogan. They took one of the most famous slogans in English, right? Good things come to those who wait. And they turned it into good things come to those who Guinness. This way, in the collective mentality, Guinness became a synonym with waiting. So it became a thing to wait for a Guinness. No one had a problem with waiting for a Guinness. No one does, even nowadays. So they had a problem, and they solved it not by changing the product, but by changing the way people perceive their product. And I thought to myself, well, these guys are smart. Maybe I can learn something. We didn't want to change anything to our game, right? The game was very good. When I came at Gameloft 18 months ago, the game was already, I don't know, 1.5 years old, I think, something like that. It is one of the longest running FPS franchises on mobile. It is a very well-balanced game. It looks amazing. It moves amazing. I tell you, it's a good game. And it's the 5th iteration already, so it has the support of a very large community. And also, it was always the forefront of the genre's evolution. So changing the product was not an option. When you want to do a first-person shooter on mobile, even if the controls are harder, you have to stick with your beliefs, right? We wanted to do a first-person shooter, and we're doing the best first-person shooter out there. So I thought to myself, if we couldn't change the product itself, what is the thing that makes people come and play? What could be our differentiator, the thing that would appeal most to the community, both older and also the newcomers? And there was only one thing that came into my mind, and that is to prove their skill. Try to ignore the picture, it's just someone with good shooting skills. So once we decided that skill is the main differentiator, the fact that people come here because they are good at this game, because they want to prove they are good at this game, we devised a different approach, a different marketing approach. And we devised a 3-steps plan in order to acknowledge and reward people's skill. Because if we didn't change the product, we need to change the way that people looked at it. So we started asking people to send us videos each week with their most awesome performances in our game. And the response was really huge. We received somewhere between 50 and 150 videos per week with people doing absolutely crazy stuff. Like our dev team and our Q&A team couldn't do those things. They were really impressive. So, and not only that, but we had a lot of traction on all our social network channels. Once we acknowledged their skill, and once they saw that we are putting them each week in front on our social network channel, they responded very well, and they started sending more and more and more videos. So we said, okay, we're on the right path. That's a good approach. So the next thing we did, we wanted to better understand those players. How do they behave? What do they like about our game? What they don't like. So we initiated one-on-one talks with the best of them. We had our community manager identifying them and started speaking with them. And so we learned a lot more, because when you play inside your own dev team, you have certain ideas. You are biased because of your cultural beliefs, because of many other factors. But when you start talking with people worldwide that play your game, that are really good at it, you start understanding a lot more in depth what happens with it. So after these 2 steps, the next step was a major one for us, and it was a big leap. And that step was esports. When you think about esports, it's really easy when you talk about PC AAA title games like Overwatch or Dota or whatever, you name it. Those games really benefit from esports. But when you talk about the mobile industry, there's not many people doing it. Honestly, we were the first-person shooter game that ever did esports, like for real. Not amateur tournaments, but real esports. So for mobiles, that was virgin territory. It was a big risk, because when you say esports, you have to say a mature game, a very well-balanced game. You are talking about a highly adaptive dev team that has to keep up with the best thing that those esports players do. Because there's one thing when you see your community playing, and there's another thing when you see top players compete against each other, and you see exactly how your game is balanced, how it could be better balanced. But esports is no easy task. We knew close to nothing when it came to organizing esports, right? We all loved watching esports, but we've never done an esport tournament. So in order to bring the best out of esports, we decided to partner with ESL. For those of you guys that don't know who ESL is, they're probably the biggest esports organizer out there. And they're doing Counter-Strike and Dota and every other game. So we wanted to offer our users the best possible experience. And in order to do that, we had to partner up with those guys. But we didn't know if our game was actually ready for esports. Okay, it was mature, it was well balanced, but we didn't know how it would behave when the top players will compete against each other. So instead of making them open tournaments for everyone from the start, we decided first to organize 4 weeks of invitation-only tournaments. We invited our top streamers, our top players, to compete against each other. They would stream this live every weekend, and we would see exactly how esports would look, because we didn't know if we were ready or not. And the response from the community was really nice. On the first edition of our invitational tournaments, we had over 50,000 views. I know that's not much when you talk about Dota, right? But when you talk about a niche game, a mobile game, that it's at its debut on esports, it was a really good metric for us. And over those 4 weeks of invitational tournaments, the entire community started asking, okay, we've seen those guys, they're good, but we can do better. When do we start competing against each other? And we knew we hit a jackpot. So after those 4 weeks, we started the first season of ESL tournaments. Those were 6 months of iOS-only tournaments. And each weekend, they would receive cash money prizes. The prizes were not big, but imagine that every weekend, we had over 200 players. That's 5 on 5, that's 40 teams per weekend on 2 servers, Europe and US. And that was really good if you compare it to any game out there. And not only that, but after each month, we would have a monthly finals with even bigger prizes, because those weekend tournaments would be just qualifiers for the actual finals. And people got better and better at the game. They started signing up each weekend. We had a lot of players, we had a lot of traction. But the moment we knew that everything went well was when Mobcrush came to us and they said, okay, you don't have an Android tournament, but we would like to fund 3 months of tournament for you guys. That means they gave us the money to pay the prizes each weekend and for the monthly finals for 3 months. And we knew it was working, actually. So once we've seen that everything was going well, not everything, I'm gonna go into the bad parts later. But when we saw that a lot of good things were happening, we had to do something. So as our producer said, we had to go in full banana on esports. That means that our dev team always had to take into consideration esports, because once every 2 months or 3 months, we have to launch an update. It's a company policy. So with this in mind, each update, they had to take care of 2 things: bringing in new content and keeping in mind always that we have esports. So we had to build a new game mode designed especially for esports. We also did a series of custom settings, because when you talk about tournaments, there are things that are not balanced always. So you have to be able to, I don't know, keep some things just for yourself and others for pro players. So we had to do all of this stuff while developing updates for our game. And that's no easy task for the developers. It had to be rebalanced all the time, because once you see pro players behaving with your weapons, they behave differently than you would expect in theory or when you play in the office, internal tests and stuff. So all the time our dev team was under fire, and I thank them for being there for us, right? But those were, let's not go to results yet. Those were the good parts, right? But there's always two sides to a coin. When you talk about esports, you also talk about hackers, because when you have a successful games, we had people hacking our game. And it's one thing to see them when you play and imagine that that guy has a hack. It's impossible that he shoots me like that. And it's a different thing when you have a live stream to actually see them, because we had teams that tried to cheat us. And that was where ESL came in, because they had admins and they were banned. But still, even if you ban a team, you ban them after everyone saw the fact that they are cheating, right? They have auto-aim and other hacks. It also was a problem because we needed streamers. We needed people. When you do tournaments, you don't do the tournaments for the players that compete in the tournaments, at least not from a marketing perspective. You do it for the rest of the community, because you're building idols, you're building icons. People have to follow other people. So when you're doing it, you're doing for the rest of your community. And if you don't have someone to stream your competitions, it's useless. You don't do it for those 200 people, right? And all the people that understood our game, that were good at our game, they wanted to play, of course. They didn't want to watch it and just comment upon it, right? So that was another problem. Localization is a big problem. When you have a worldwide game and it's spread all over the world, you have a problem when the commentators only speak in English, because Japan is a big market, China is a big market, they don't speak English that well. And this problem, honestly, up to date, it's not solved yet. We are in talks with some people, but still, that's a problem. And of course, when you talk about esports, you talk about costs. It's not very cheap to do esports. You have to offer prices, you have to have a good partnership if you want to do it, but we decided that was the best thing for us. So it's not easy, but it paid off for us. So we took one of our biggest disadvantages, or one of our flaws, the fact that the game is hard to play. You need to understand the mechanics, you need to practice a lot. You need to be good at it to be able to play it. And instead of changing that, we changed people's perspective. We said, okay, if you want to play our game, we will reward you if you're good at it. So now, I'm not going to stick too long to the results, actually, because it's not relevant to any of you guys out there, except for the guys at Gameloft. But we had a big increase in daily active users, in revenues. Our social networks were really, really good after that time, with audience reach, engagement, impression, everything went up. Also the YouTube, because we were doing live streams on YouTube, we had an increase in audience, in views. So everything went well. Of course, there are things that didn't went so well, because when you don't adapt your game to new players, the new players will come, will see the game, will find it difficult, and they will leave. So our retention didn't go up. Our churn rate went up a little bit. So there was always pluses and minuses, but at the end of it, it was really successful for us. Now, the next thing for the Modern Combat series is that there's a new spin-off that's coming in a couple of weeks, hopefully. It's called Modern Combat Versus, and it's really an amazing game. And they tried a different route than we did. They said, okay, we want to do a more mainstream game. We don't want it to be this niched. And they added auto-aim and auto-fire to the game. Honestly, I have no clue if that'll work for them or not, but it'll be a really interesting case study for us to see if their approach will be better or worse than ours. So my conclusion is that if your game has a flaw, a thing that you consider to be really a problem, then fix it. Our experience tells us from a marketing side of view that you cannot bullshit your users. They will smell it a mile away. You cannot just spin something around and hope it'll work, because maybe sometimes it will, but most of the times it won't. But if that so-called flaw is actually something that could differentiate you from your competitors, that could be an edge that only you have, and you can market that, I think that's an added value, and it's definitely worth a try. It's not easy, it will come with downsides, but if you stick to your beliefs and if you listen to your community, if you talk to them, if you understand what they want, what they feel, what they like about your game and what they're passionate about, they will stick with you also. So this is me. Thank you very much. That's about it.
What I understand from you, what you're saying is that sometimes when you have a flow in a game, like a design flow, especially in your case, it was a very hardware-related flow, because it was something that, like, the controller from a FPS perspective was not really regular. So, but you decided not to address the design flow, but to market it, actually, to make marketing on top of it. So my question would be, when can you decide when a flow is something that has to be addressed by design or can be marketed the way it is?
Okay, that's a good question. In my opinion, when you build a game, design-wise, you have to have some pillars, right? Some original ideas that you had and that you want to stick with. In our case, we wanted to build, the dev team wanted to build the perfect FPS shooter for mobile. So in our case, this flaw was only perceived as a flaw by players that had problems with the learning curve because it was steep. But for us, it wasn't a problem. It was exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to build a first-person shooter, and that's what we did. We stick to it control. So in my opinion, changing that control scheme wouldn't have helped, because we are building a first-person shooter. We are not building an idle game or something. We are building a first-person shooter. So rather than changing that, we decided to change people's perspective and make them understand that we believe in that control system. And if they believe, we will reward them.
Hi, very cool presentation. Thanks for this.
Thank
Are
you.
you concerned in any way that the spin-off that is just launching wasn't exactly very clear for me how similar it is to the main game? But are you concerned in any way that being very different in terms of going more casual, having all these auto features on, will has a risk of potentially hurting the main game?
Good question. Honestly, we did consider the fact that it will hurt the game, but imagine that this is the 5th part of our game, right? So instead of naming the next one Modern Combat 6, it was a decision to name it Modern Combat Versus. So it's something that in our mind, Modern Combat Versus should succeed us, right? Modern Combat 5 had its length. We celebrated already 3 years old. So it's something that we took into consideration. We have no idea how it will work, though. The fact that it didn't call it Modern Combat 6 is because they changed a little bit more. They decided to move the environment in a more futuristic way. They don't have any single player. It's strictly multiplayer. So they did something different that we did altogether. I have no idea how that will affect us. Probably in the first phase, it will affect us because players will want to try it out because it's something new, of course. But whether or not they will stick with Modern Combat Versus or they will return to us, that's something, unfortunately, I cannot answer yet.